When I was young, I loved reading books. Sometimes I would sneak out of class during school, go to the library, and read book after book, shelf after shelf. I think I even finished that whole library. One day, my neighbors got a new encyclopedia. I took out volume after volume until I went through the entire encyclopedia. And yet, with all the books that I read, with all the volumes of encyclopedias that I've read, nothing has transformed me as much as the stories that I read. It didn't matter how much information was out there. It didn't matter how many facts there were out there. Nothing like a personal story to drive change. Whether it was Sharansky's Fear No Evil, or Menachem Begin's Revolt, Art Spiegelman's Mouse, whatever it was, these were the books that really changed who I am today. And if you think about it in terms of global impact, you'll also see that's true for others. Take a look, for example, at the topic as vast and as serious as the Holocaust, with all the many, many well-deserved thousands of books out there about everything that was lost, about the numbers, the data. Has anything ever changed the world consciousness about the Holocaust as much as books like Anne Frank's personal story or Elie Wiesel's Night? It's those books that really make the difference. If you take a look and think about what changed the world's perspective about slavery, it wasn't this sermon or the other. It was the story written in 1852 by Harriet Beecher Stowe, Uncle Tom's Cabin, that really was able to drive the change. Much can be said about the dangers and the slippery slope of totalitarianism, but nothing really drove that point home as much as George Orwell's 1984. The power of storytelling is what changes this world, not only in the field of history, but also in terms of science and reality. If you think about Albert Einstein, what has he done? He told the world a story about how physics works. If you speak about people like economists, like Daniel Kahneman, he'll tell you the story of how economics work and how we make our decisions. If you think about Herzl, he told the Jewish people a story about how they could have a state of their own. And he said, you'll laugh at me now and in 5 years, but not in 50 years. And exactly 50 years later, after he published this and spoke this way, the Jewish state was declared in Tel Aviv. Stories are what changes everything. There's a great Israeli book written by Mordechai Shatner who speaks about the success of storytellers. And he says how the reason Jews excel so much in shaping this world is not necessarily because this skill or the other, as much as the ability to tell stories. Our ability to tell the world a story is what has brought Jews to the forefront of Nobel Prizes and really being able to transform the world. If you look at the Bible, the ultimate book, and you think about the stories that are there, Adam and Eve, Abraham and Sarah, Joseph and the brothers, the Exodus from Egypt, ask yourself for a moment, what is the moral of this story? Hint, it doesn't say. The Torah does not tell us what the moral of the story is because it leaves it blank there. It leaves a blank space for us to learn from it and to fill it with our imagination. What is the moral of the longest story in the Bible, the story of Joseph and the brothers? Well, we don't really know. We know it has to do with the evils of hate, the evils of division, the evils of disunity, jealousy. The rabbis make several suggestions, but the bottom line is, at the end of the day, it remains open for us to fill in and learn those lessons on our own. What's the moral of the story of Jacob and Esau? Is it against jealousy, sibling rivalry, hatred? Well, it's there for us to fill in, and that's exactly what makes Passover the most observed holiday in the world and the one with the greatest impact. In fact, if you think about Passover, the commandment of matzah, maror, the Korban Pesach, all those commandments in the Torah are just a sideshow to the main commandment. The main commandment is telling the story. The rabbis teach us lechem oni. What is lechem oni? Bread of poverty, but it also is lechem she'oni malav dvarim harbe. It's a bread that has many stories told with it. And that is the story of Passover night. It is the mitzvah of Magid, vehigadeta lebincha bayom hahu. When the Jews leave Egypt, before any commandment comes the way of the Jewish people, the number one concern Moses has is to make sure that our stories are told, that we tell the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. And telling the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, like anything Jewish, has its laws, has its specifications, and how it should be done. Maimonides states in chapter 7 of the book of Chametz Umatzah, it is a positive commandment of the Torah to relate the miracles and wonders brought for our ancestors in Egypt on the night of the 15th of Nisan, as the verse states, remember this day on which you left Egypt, even though one does not have a son. Even great sages are obligated to tell the exodus from Egypt. However, whoever elaborates concerning the events which occurred or took place on this night is worthy of praise. Think about that for a moment. Even if you're home alone, you need to tell the story. Even if you need to know everything, even if you do know everything, you need to tell that story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. So it's not about knowledge. It's not about conveying the knowledge. It's about telling the story. Even if you're sitting in a jail cell on your own, like Natan Sharansky did, you need to tell that story. You need to repeat that story. And it's interesting, the Sefer HaChinuch written in Barcelona in the 1300s says that you have to tell the story. Not only every person has to tell it, but everyone has to tell it in their own style. You need to share the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim the way you understand it, emphasizing what matters most to you. In fact, Maimonides continues in chapter 7 of the laws of Chametz and Matzah. It is a mitzvah to inform one's son, even though they do not ask. A father should teach his son according to his son's knowledge. If the son is older and wise, he should inform him what happened to us in Egypt and the miracles brought for us by Moses, our teacher, everything according to the son's knowledge. So not only does the story need to be tailored to the person telling the story, it also needs to be tailored to the person who's listening to the story, who the story is being told to. I had a fascinating concept. Tell it according to your ability, but also make sure you tell it according to the ability of others to understand it. That's what you need to be doing. The Maimonides continues in the book of Mishneh Torah, and he says he should make changes on this night so that the children will see and be motivated and ask, why is this night different than all the other nights? So there's this Socratic method where we're told, make sure when you tell the story, it's done as a response to a question, because we learn best when there's a question. That's why you have the famous Manishtana Halayla Hazeh Mikol Haleilot. Famously, when Rabbi Sachs was knighted by the queen, there were many requirements. He couldn't bow down. A Jew can't bow down to another person. And so the Jews in Britain joked around at the time, why is this night different than all the other nights? But in all seriousness, your children's learning must come through a question. It has to come through them asking questions, through them wondering, what is it that's going on? And finally, when we tell the story, Maimonides continues and says it must be done in a way that starts with the negative, starts with our humble beginning, whether that is speaking about Terach, the father of Avram, being an idol worshiper, or whether, according to Shmuel in the Talmud, we're speaking about Lavan, the one who tried to kill Jacob, our forefather. No matter what it is, you must make sure you prepare yourself in a way that is showing that you came out of Egypt, but also that you remember your humble beginning. I want to share with you a family tradition of mine. My grandmother, Hinda Novoseller, who came from the Chernobyl, Belz Hasidic dynasties, was born in Bardichev, which is today in Ukraine. And she, in her house growing up, her father, David Shlomo Novoseller, who was a rabbi in Ukraine and later in Philadelphia, he used to pour water on the floor, put a pillowcase and fill it with his belongings as if it's a sack, and he used to cross through the living room as if he's walking through the Red Sea. Why? Because we say in the Haggadah, B'chol dor vador chayav adam lir'ot et atzmo, or some say lehar'ot et atzmo, ke'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim. The Exodus from Egypt is not only about telling the story, it's not only about telling it in an experiential way through eating the matzah, the maror, the charoset, leaning to the left, but it's also through pretending as if we ourselves have gone out from Egypt and showing that we ourselves have gone out of Egypt. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom, a happy Passover, and may we see a redemption in our days like in those days.